Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Special Regional Italy Episode 3, Lombardy.
E non posso più accucciarmi e così ritorno su, lascio i colli nelle valli tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
This episode and the mini-series is made possible by our friends at Explore Worldwide, who offer small group adventures led by local tour leaders in over 100 countries around the world. Don't just travel, explore. Head to exploreworldwide.com for more information. I always love going to London. I used to actually live near the great city as a kid in Rickmansworth, which actually appears at the start of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. A young woman sitting outside a cafe on a street in Rickmansworth comes up to the solution to make the world a better place, but then the world is blown up. Anyway, you know that, as with many parts of the world, London has a partly Roman origin, Londinium. Roman London was more or less limited to what is known today as the City, the financial area of London that goes from Temple to the Tower of London. You can actually find bits of the ancient Roman walls just above the tower and a statue of Caesar. There's also a more recent trace of Italy in London, still in the city, aside of course from all the actual Italians, a street known as Lombard Street. This is a testament to the Middle Ages, when the Italian banks had the finances of the world in the palm of their hands. Bankers from Florence, Siena, Venice, Genoa, and so on could be found all over the world, including London. At that time, the Italians were not actually called that. After all, Italy as a political entity didn't exist. The Italians were referred to as Lombards. But where does that word come from? Well, once upon a time there was a Germanic tribe called the Winili, which could mean either eager for battle or the cooler demon dogs. Like many Germanic populations, they made their way down from northern Europe. They ended up having a run-in with the Vandals, and that's not fun on the best of days, and it seemed like a big battle was inevitable. The Winili men invoked the god of gods, Woden, who promised that he would grant victory to the first army that he saw on the day of the battle. The Winili women, perhaps knowing where the true power lay, prayed to his wife Freya. She suggested that the women wear their hair in front of their faces, making it look like they had really long beards, and they should stand along with the men on the day of the battle, making the army look bigger. On the day of the battle, Freya woke Odin, and when he looked towards the battlefield, he saw a great host with odd-looking long beards and said, "Who are those warriors with the langeberte, the long beard?" Langeberte, in ancient Norse, in Italian, became Longobardi, and in English, the Lombards. From that moment on, the Lombards would have the style of shaving the back of their heads and growing their hair long at the sides and front. The Lombards would then invade Italy in 568 and conquer a good part of the Italian peninsula, the other bit still being controlled by the Byzantines. But that's a story we already know, and if you don't remember, you had better go back to the start of the podcast. They fixed their capital in Pavia, and the area around their capital came to be known as Lombardy, which at the time stretched far beyond the modern-day region. So let's start our exploration from Pavia. We won't get to visit all of Lombardy, as there are more provinces than in the other regions we've visited, so we'll just have to look at my favourite parts, so you'll have to come and explore for yourselves, perhaps with the guidance of Explore Worldwide. Although, at least for Italians, Lombardy is associated with the fashionable, business-minded modern Milan, perhaps one of the most iconic corners of Lombardy is Lake Como. You may know it as the setting for films such as Star Wars and the homes of some Hollywood stars, but it's also a treasure trove of natural beauty spots, hilltop villages, and countryside as the Po Valley rises to meet the majestic Alps. One of the best ways to explore the area is to get back in tune with the patient rhythms of nature, and Explore Worldwide can help you with this. For example, their Lake Como walking tour experience gives you the perfect balance of nature, charming villages, and rolling vineyards. You start from the peace and quiet of Gravedona and hike to the hilltop village of Livio, and then through vineyards, villages, and meadows to Sorico, home to a natural reserve. The next day you cross the rippling waters of the lake to Bellagio, the pearl of Lake Como, and wander through the cobbled streets. The tour also includes visits to Rezzonico with its 13th century castle, and Dongo, where fascist leader Benito Mussolini saw his dramatic end. Explore Worldwide's respect for the local culture and environment extends to finding local tour leaders who can get you off the beaten track and into the heart of your adventure, and their small groups allow for a more personalized experience you will never forget. Whether it's visiting a Roman villa in the classical tour of Sicily or a food and wine tour in the hilltop towns of Tuscany, Explore take care of everything, putting the quality of their local tour leaders front and center, so you'll truly understand the wow factor of where you are. If you're thinking about your next adventure, head to exploreworldwide.com to find out more. Don't just travel, explore. Go to exploreworldwide.com for more information. With the help of Explore, we had arrived at the ancient Lombard capital of Italy, Pavia. The city itself, aside from the usual presence like most Italian cities of a Duomo, a cathedral, also has a beautiful monastery, the Certosa di Pavia. This complex also gives its name to a typical dish, the risotto alla certosina, a fish-based risotto. Aside from cathedrals and monasteries, and commonly a castle, Italian cities often have a famous bridge, Ponte Vecchio in Florence, for example, or Rialto in Venice. The one in Pavia is the covered stone bridge. The previous Roman bridge had been washed away in 999, and those that wanted to cross the river had to rely on a ferry service. As the year drew to a close, an evening came when many worshippers wanted to get across the river to the other side, where there was a church. As the crowd gathered and grew larger, a fog rose and covered the river. Out of the fog came a man dressed in red. As he emerged, the fog gathered and formed a bridge over the water. The man said that the bridge would become a stone one if the first living being that crossed it promised that their soul would be his forever. Indeed, the man was the devil himself. Nobody in the crowd really knew what to do when a voice spoke up, suggesting that the devil should get going on the stone bridge. Meanwhile, they would discuss who would be the unlucky first to cross it. Soon enough, the devil had finished with the bridge and now awaited eagerly to see who would be his victim. He was not at all pleased when a goat came trip-trapping across the bridge. It turns out that the man who had spoken up among the crowd was the Archangel Michael himself. The devil had been tricked, and by his own ancient arch-enemy. He raged and ranted and sent a great storm against the bridge, but he had done such a good job that it withstood his wrath, and stands to this day. The southern part of the province of Pavia is known as the Oltrepo Pavese, and here you can taste wine such as Pinot Nero. If instead we move north from the province of Pavia, the ancient capital of the Kingdom of Italy, we head to the province of another capital city, Milan. Interestingly, although Milan is perhaps the most famous of Lombard cities, the province of Milan is actually one of the smallest in Lombardy. Milan was the capital of the Roman Empire from when Emperor Diocletian made it so in 286 until 402, the twilight years of the empire. It was then, of course, the capital of the Duchy of Milan, which came into existence in 1395 when Gian Galeazzo Visconti became the first duke, although the Visconti family had been ruling the city and surrounding areas since 1277, and the duchy would last until 1797. Today you could say that although the first capital of United Italy was Turin, the second Florence, and now, of course, Rome, Milan is the financial capital of Italy. That is where you will find the Borsa, the stock market of Milan, which is actually owned by the London stock market. And here, once again, we see the connection between London and Italy. Then, of course, Milan is the fashion capital of Italy and one of the fashion capitals of the world. Of course, the most characteristic building in Milan is the Gothic-style Duomo, the cathedral. Do you know that it is the largest cathedral in Italy? Wait, I can hear you say, what about St. Peter's in Rome? To which I would answer, remember that St. Peter's is not in Italy, but in the Vatican. Of course, we could do a whole podcast series, not just episode, on Milan itself, but this will be one of the painful choices that we have to make, and so on we go. Moving north takes us through one of the only two provinces smaller than Milan, Monza, where you can admire the Iron Crown of the Lombards, a crown used by Lombard kings and later for Holy Roman emperors, which supposedly contains the relic of one of the nails of the cross of Jesus. After passing through Monza, we will find Como and Lecco, which are the two southernmost points of a spindly, spiderly lake known as Lake Como, which we mentioned before, and you can go on the Explore Tour. You may have seen it in films such as Casino Royale, Ocean's 12, and the aforementioned Star Wars Episode 2. It's an odd-shaped lake, like an upside-down Y, or if you're an 80s film fan, it makes me think of a wobbly version of Doc Brown's flux capacitor. It is one of the deepest lakes in Europe, and I don't know about you, but for me, really deep waters mean only one thing: monsters. Indeed, just like Loch Ness, Como has its own monster, the Lariosaurus, of which a fossil was also found along the shores of the lake. In 1946, the newspapers reported a series of sightings and even attacks by the monster. Other sightings occurred in 1953 and 54, but nothing since. If you're heading to Lake Como and thinking about going for a swim, just keep your eyes open. You can really imagine all sorts of mysteries in this area of steep hills sloping down to the deep lake. Which in itself has an interesting historical centre. There is a fortress, a tower called Castel Baradello, which dominates the surrounding valley with wonderful views. Of course, the tower has its own ghost, and it allows us to go back and talk about the Visconti again. After the feudal period in Italy, which didn't really catch on much as it did elsewhere in Europe, towards the end of the 1000s, many cities developed into communes, independent city-states that grew to great power but eventually gave way to the signorie, in which ruling dynasties took power over cities and expanded them into the local territory. This obviously wasn't always a peaceful process, and the new ruling dynasties would have to fight it out with other families. The struggle in Lombardy was between the Visconti, who would win out, and the Della Torre family. The definitive Battle of Desio occurred in 1277, when Ottone Visconti defeated Napoleone della Torre. Napo was captured and imprisoned in the fortress of Baradello, hanging from a ceiling in a cage, where he would die of starvation after 18 months. Other chroniclers say he killed himself by bashing his head against the bars of his cage. His ghost, along with others tortured and killed in the castle, are said to haunt its halls. Como is on the western leg of Lake Como, while on the eastern leg you have Lecco. Now the people of Lecco and Como, being neighbours and this being friendly Italy, love each other, right? No, not at all. Like most adjoining places, they hate each other. The people of Lecco are particularly annoyed that the whole lake is called Lake Como and refer, at least to the right leg of it, as Lake Lecco. They may have a bit of an inferiority complex, but with their characteristic matitone, the big pencil tower, Lecco is just as pretty, nestled as it is between the lake and the surrounding hills. Unfortunately, Lecco, for every Italian student, goes from mild annoyance to a school-time nightmare. There's a book that starts, quel ramo del lago di Como che volge a mezzogiorno tra due catene non interrotte di monti tutto a seni e a golfi. That branch of Como Lake that looks towards south between two uninterrupted mountain chains, all mounds and valleys. This is the start of a novel, I Promessi Sposi, The Betrothed, by 19th century author Alessandro Manzoni, and every Italian child, both in middle school and high school, has to read and study this boring book. Now, of course, as an adult, one must appreciate that it's not so bad, and the cultural value is important and blah, blah, blah. But it's just that, and allow me a short polemic here, if you want to get kids to grow up loving reading, get them to read something they love. Be it comic books or, best of all, Stephen King, I feel that very few people come to love reading through the Promessi Sposi. But then again, I might be wrong. So, with whatever book we've chosen in our bag, let's move east now to continue our travels, and we will arrive in the province of Bergamo, where we find one of those often overlooked gems of Italy, the city of Bergamo itself. We spoke about Veneto in our previous episode, and now we are in Lombardy, which historically, starting from the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, were the Republic of Venice and the Duchy of Milan. And Bergamo was sort of a borderland between the two who fought over it. Indeed, you can find traces of both powers in the city, such as the Fontanone Visconteo, the Visconti fountain, or the Rocca, the fortress, which was completed by the Visconti. On the other hand, you have another element that has been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Venetian walls. The walls of Bergamo are still very much intact and surround the higher part of the city, Bergamo Alta, the historical part. In the last episode, we spoke about people visiting Verona and going to Juliet's house to rub the boobs of her statue for good luck. In Bergamo, you could say in a certain sense that the girls can get their own back. The whole question is tied to an important historical figure related to Bergamo, Bartolomeo Colleoni. He was, in the late 1400s, a nobleman from the Bergamo province and a condottiero, meaning a military leader for hire, and was one of the most well-known and successful of his time. Also, thanks to the habit of not being on the battlefield when things were looking bad, so he could say that he hadn't actually lost. He was much more than that, an important administrator and philanthropist, and one of the many charitable organizations he set up still exists to this day, helping troubled young women. He set up a family chapel that you can find in Piazza Duomo in Bergamo. The touching thing is that inside the chapel you can find, of course, his tomb, but also that of his beloved daughter, Medea. He adored her, and when at the age of 14 she took ill, Bartolomeo left the battlefield to go and be with his daughter, hoping to nurse her back to health. All he could do instead was watch her waste away. Medea had a pet sparrow, and the little creature died the same day as the girl. You can also see its little body under a dome in the chapel. Now, outside of the chapel, on the gate, you can find the Colleoni family emblem, and that is where the peculiarity starts. You see, Colleoni means balls, in the sense of testicles. That in itself is a bit odd and quite a bit funny, at least to my childish humour, but the even more curious aspect is that said set of male attributes on said gate are three. 3 pairs of 3 testicles. Supposedly, an ancestor of Bartolomeo Colleoni had a condition known as polyorchidism, meaning having more than 2 testicles. Bartolomeo wore the emblem proudly, perhaps wanting everyone to know that he also had a lot of balls. So, if you visit Bergamo and you want to have good luck, you can go to the Colleoni chapel, preferably at midnight, and rub the Colleoni balls on the gate. You can't miss them because, like Juliet's boobs in Verona, they are a lot more shiny than the metal around them. Armed with the good luck of the Colleoni, we can continue east into the province of Brescia and the eastern border of Lombardy, touching upon Veneto and another lake, Lake Garda. We already mentioned in the Veneto episode that my favorite spot on Lake Garda is Sirmione and its Della Scala castle, but it also has a Roman-era archaeological site at the Grotto of Catullus. Brescia and its province in general are very rich in Roman ruins, an element that has helped it become yet another UNESCO World Heritage Site. Archaeology has also revealed a lot of Lombard, as in the Germanic tribe we mentioned, artifacts, which are not as common as you'd expect for a population which ruled over much of Italy for 2 centuries. This is an interesting example of a less advanced culture coming into contact with a more dominant one, that of the ex-Roman Empire. Indeed, the Lombards did not leave much architecture, and by the time they were defeated by the Franks in 774, they had stopped speaking their original language, leaving only a smattering of words in the Italian language. Brescia has a history of feisty resistance and independence. During the Middle Ages and early modern age, it was contested by Milan and Venice, and for a time, Brescia was perhaps the most important producer of weapons and armor in the Western world. This spirit earned it the nickname the Lioness of Italy for the 10 Days of Brescia, a revolt in 1849 in which the citizens of the city tried to throw off the yoke of Austro-Hungarian dominance, with the Habsburg dynasty ruling over Lombardy, Veneto, and other parts of northern Italy until the country was unified between 1861 and 1870, although Trento and Trieste would remain in Austrian hands until after World War I. Moving out into the province of Brescia, if we want a more quiet, smaller alternative to Lake Garda, there is Lago Iseo, and for wine enthusiasts, the province of Brescia is Franciacorta territory. For our last stop on our travels around Lombardy, let's now move to Mantua. Mantua bears traces of one of my favourite historical Italian figures, Matilda, Countess of Canossa, a powerful medieval countess and Margravine who ruled over vast lands from the confines of Rome, all of Tuscany, and into parts of Lombardy, Veneto, and Emilia-Romagna between the 11th and 12th centuries. She supported the popes, particularly Gregory VI, in their attempt to reform the church and assert its authority. She hosted the famous event of the humiliation or forgiveness of Canossa between Pope Gregory and Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, and later took up arms against said emperor and defeated him. If you are a video game buff, you may have played as Matilda in the game Crusader Kings. Mantua was her father Bonifacio's capital, as much as you could have a capital in a time when rulers would constantly move around their dominions. You can also find a church commissioned by her, the Rotonda of Santo Stefano, which interestingly also shows how much lower the ground level was at the Countess's time. This church was created to hold what is supposedly the relic of the blood of Christ, brought to Italy by the Roman centurion turned Christian Longinus. The blood is now preserved in the nearby church of St. Andrew, across the picturesque Piazza delle Erbe. You will find Matilda's first resting place in the province of Mantua, in the majestic monastery of Sant'Apollinare in San Benedetto Po, but her final resting place is in St. Peter's in Rome, where she is one of only 3 women buried there. Another element that makes Mantua stand out is the fact that it is surrounded by lakes, the very imaginatively named Lago Superiore, superior, di mezzo, middle, and inferiore, inferior. 2 of the lakes are on the same level, but the third is higher, allowing the difference to be used to harness hydraulic power. These are actually fake lakes, having been created by diverting the course of the Mincio River, not recently with earth-moving equipment, but in 1190, thanks to a project by Bergamo architect Andrea Putentino. The city was once actually an island, allowing it to stay as a little independent city, then duchy, under the Gonzaga dynasty, one of the oldest in Europe, while surrounded by hungry neighbors such as Milan, Venice, and the Este of Ferrara. Indeed, under the Gonzaga, and in particular Isabella d'Este, wife of Duke Francesco Gonzaga, Mantua became an important center of the Italian Renaissance. The precise date of the foundation of Mantua is not known, but there is a pretty good foundation myth. It goes back to the prophet Manto, daughter of the blind prophet Tiresias, he of Homeric fame. She supposedly escaped from Thebes, came to the area of Mantua, and created the lakes with her tears, possibly because she didn't like the horrible swampy area she had arrived in. It is said that if you drink from the waters of the lake, you can gain powers of foresight. I think you'd probably just get a tummy ache, but if you have a portable tea kettle, you can give it a go and let me know if you have gained magical powers. Anyway, Manto soon cheered up and found not just any hubby, but the river god of the Tiber, Tiberius, and they had a son, Ocnus, and it was he who founded the city of Mantova in the name of his mum. So all's well that ends well. This was all according to one of Mantua's most famous sons, Virgil, in his Aeneid. You can find his statue in the city, as well as a park dedicated to him. Well, that concludes our visit to Lombardy, for now. Indeed, we did not do it full justice. We barely mentioned Monza and Lecco, and not at all Varese, Sondrio, Lodi, and Cremona, to whom we apologize. But that is all the more reason for you to organize your own adventure, thanks to our friends at Explore Worldwide who have made this episode and series possible. So please go over to exploreworldwide.com to show them our appreciation. Or even better, use the link in the show notes so they know who sent you. As always, thank you very much for listening, and until our next journey, arrivederci.